In this segment, we're going to learn how to keep shadow dance together. And this is going to be, especially for a beginning orchestra or second year orchestra, this is going to be the biggest challenge. So how do we keep these kids together so that it doesn't fall apart in the performance? If you haven't watched my previous video on uneven bows, please watch that and make sure that you're working on fundamentals for your students. Where do we start in the bow for quarter notes? Where do we start in the bow for eighth notes? Where do we start in the bow for dotted half notes, half notes? That's going to make a big difference in the result. You know, if a student runs out of bow, they're likely to rush. If a student gets to extreme parts of the bows, again, they like to rush, and most of the problem that we're going to have in this piece is with the rushing. So you've had them done all these rote techniques, and they're successful doing that, and you have them start playing, and they're doing great, but all of a sudden the piece starts to fall apart. Okay, why is it falling apart? You know, where are we getting off? And if it's starting to fall apart, look up and see where they are in the bows, and you'll probably see that something went wrong. Okay, so where did this happen? A lot of these things happen on rests and retakes. So if we look right here and measure 12 for first violins, or measure 13 for everybody else, we've got a half note and then a rest, and then we've got a quarter note on beat 13. It's basically the same thing here for seconds and violas. But the issue is not every student will retake the same way. Not all of them will retake and end up at the balance point. So if they're not in the same part of the bow here, it's going to be a lot harder to keep everybody together. Measure 27 is also kind of a trap here because they're going to start this from the balance point, and then they have a half note here, and in 28 they've got that tie from the dotted half to the half in 29. So they really need to get back to the frog for this part in 28 for your upper strings. And this is going to be a challenge maybe for your second violins and your violas. So you might want to consider in seconds and violas to add a lift here so that they can get back to the balance point. Otherwise, they're going to really need to play a slower bow for that half note, or they're going to really have to use a fast bow for this up bow. Now, it's probably going to be more musical if we try to even out the sound. We don't do too fast of an up bow and not too slow of a down bow. So you might want to add just a quick little lift and then go on to the quarter note. The first violins are already sustaining, so that's fine. Low strings have a moving part here. They drop down to this D. We have these octave Ds in the cellos. We don't have it in the basses because basses don't shift in this piece. So if you had to add a lift there, it's not going to be the end of the world. There's other people that are going to cover that. Okay, this part in 42 and 43 always tends to rush too. It's the only time that it's stated, and it's only in the first violins. So we have this down, hold, up, down, up, and then back to 46. And that's an uneven bow as well because we've got quarter, quarter, and then we've got another quarter, but it's tied to another quarter, so it's 2-to-1. So on those down bows, we have to encourage our students to use a slow bow, and it happens twice. So we have a slow bow here, and we have a slow bow here. It's not as important in 44 to slow the bow down as it is at 42, because we have to have enough bow to play the second tie. If they play a little faster on this one, it's not going to be as devastating. It's not going to cause them to rush because they are going to have more bow to work with on these up, down quarter notes here. Whereas here they're approaching another tie. So if they really use too much bow, then they're likely to rush on the tie in 43, 44. 66 tends to rush. Rests in general tend to rush. So my strategy for 60 is to try to get them to do a true retake, get them to exaggerate the retake, and that'll help slow their bows down. They don't really have to retake at all. Like you could play this Like it just basically they have the retake so that you have the same bow direction for beat one of the next measure. But students, they could stay in the same part of the bow and keep going. They're just going to rush if they do that. So make sure to emphasize that big retake, big circle bow, reset, and grip before the next note. And that'll help slow them down so they won't rush. Low strings, rest, rest, 3, rest, rest, 3. Just make sure they're really counting. When I see directors on the podium and stuff is going wrong, they tend to do the opposite of what you probably should do. Like their gestures get bigger, they start to panic. Students don't respond very well to that. Try to tighten everything down and try to use a little bit more precision and control rather than making everything big and aggressive. If they're rushing and you get bigger and more aggressive, is that going to help them slow down, or are they just going to rush more, right? So it's kind of like if you're trying to calm down a room that's way too loud. You don't want to get louder yourself. You actually want to get softer so that everybody has to struggle to listen to you, and that way they end their conversations and the attention's on you. Maybe you set the baton down and just get a toothpick or like a push pin or something really small, and just conduct with that and see if they can follow you and see how much better they stay together. Of course, pizzicato is always going to be a challenge. In season 1, I've got a lot of content on the correct technique for pizzicato to make sure that students are playing that correctly using an advanced pizzicato technique. It's different from plucking, in the early method books that practice left hand first and then right hand independently, and then eventually they put them together in like a month or so. They're not teaching pizzicato technique, they're just teaching plucking, and so we got to get them away from that and on to big boy and big girl pizzicato technique. So again, check out season 1 for that. If they're using the right technique, it's gonna help them stay together, because pizzicato really likes to rush too. Sort of like my advice with the retakes with the pizzicati, like the more exaggerated you make the motion, okay, the more you come off the string this way, the more it's going to slow them down. So that's why in the teaching companion, we do these flying pizzicatos so that students can spend more time off the string than on the string. It's going to slow them down so that they stay perfectly together. Students need to also make sure that they grab the string for each note. They can't just, land on the string and strum it again. That's not pizzicato. Pizzicato, you grab the string and then you let it go and come off. It's that additional layer of technique that not just makes it sound good, but it also keeps your orchestra from rushing. All right, in the next video, we're going to talk about form. They make it a point here in the first page to point out the form. And for some of us in the teaching world, that's a requirement to teach form. I think it's useful to know some form, and I'm going to build my case for that in the next one. I know for a lot of people, music theory is boring, but I'm going to make my case for why it's important to know that stuff in the next segment. So I hope to see you then.